Hello, and welcome to Underscored, a podcast by Young Voices. I'm your host, Stephen Kent. Happy to be back at it with you today and going boldly into the week's news. And here to lead the charge with me are two of Young Voices' finest, Jordan Lancaster and Matthew Liles. Welcome to you both. So first up today is the beginning of the Democratic debates. We'll talk about the 20-candidate field and the DNC's approach to managing the chaos, with the first debate happening tonight on NBC. It's about to get wild.
Beto got a lot of attention just because in Texas he was able to give Cruz a run for his money.
Then, what will most likely dominate the debates this week are dueling proposals from Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders on student loan debt cancellation. Both candidates have pushed the field left on this issue, offering full bailouts for student loan debt. But Bernie's goes a step further than Warren's. We're going to discuss the merit and pitfalls of both ideas.
How all the Democratic candidates seem to just be coming out more towards the left over time. Warren's plan, I think, was the second after Castro's, and it's certainly more moderate.
And lastly, San Francisco is going to ban the sales of e-cigs in the city. You heard that correctly.
I think the regulation is just a textbook example of something that lawmakers don't like, so let's ban it without even thinking about the consequences.
So, this is Underscored. Let's do this. On NBC tonight, 10 Democrats are going to duke it out to try and get their poll numbers to a recognizable number like 3.14% in a field of 20 candidates. The debate, split into two nights with different participants in each round, marks the real beginning of campaign season. So who's going to be taking the field? Let's see. Tonight we are going to see Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker, Julian Castro, Tulsi Gabbard, Jay Inslee, Amy Klobuchar, Bill de Blasio, John Delaney, and Tim Ryan. Wow, what rock stars! This will be interesting. Well, let's begin with our panel. Jordan, if you can even keep all of those names straight that I listed off, what are you looking for in tonight's first debate? How can a Democrat stand out in such a crowded field like this?
Well, I think it's going to be hard, but the person who I think probably will stand out the most, in my opinion, is Warren, because people were kind of talking about how, it's kind of funny she's at the kids' table. The people coming on tonight, most of them aren't polling very well. Sanders and Biden on night two is going to be interesting, but I think Warren is the most recognizable in terms of name recognition. So I think having less competition, in my opinion, on night one is really going to give her an opportunity to stand out in a way that she wouldn't have had if she was on night two.
I would go for Beto, actually, for someone that I'd like to see really put his name out there tonight. Being from Texas, it's been a little surreal to watch him kind of disappear into the fold of all the candidates, and his campaign has been criticized recently for being very light on policy. He loves to stand up on the table with the sleeves rolled up and give the big stump speeches, but it'll be interesting to see how he responds to that criticism, and maybe he comes out swinging tonight with a couple policy proposals.
Yeah, it's really funny how this is shaked out. The first debates in the Republican primary in 2015 were picked, like there was an undercard debate. There were the top polling people, and then there was the B-listers. And this was really sort of meant to be the kids' table. I think the media even called it that many times. But tonight's debate was supposed to have kind of been picked by random. They really just sort of sorted things out randomly to try to be fair. But still, you had Elizabeth Warren kind of end up in what looks like a kids' table lineup. But, Beto O'Rourke and Cory Booker are big names too, right?
Yeah, I think Beto got a lot of attention just because in Texas he was able to give Cruz a run for his money. And I think that boosted him up because so many people were surprised by that. I think what's hurt him in the Democratic primary is it really came out now that he's not kind of able to run on Ted Cruz's opponent. Mm-hmm. He's lost a lot of his notability because he really doesn't have any standout policies or standout qualities, especially in a field of so many people.
Well, his standout quality for this Democratic field is just how cis and white he is. This has
Right,
been
exactly.
the identity politics blowback for Beto O'Rourke has been pretty sharp, where he was their darling when he was taking on Ted Cruz because you had a bipolar choice. But now he seems sort of like this dead weight in a very diverse field. I'm pretty sure they're going to send him out to pasture quite quickly.
And I think that's why it's important for him to really come out with some policy and some ideas, because he's definitely not the female person of color that I think a lot of younger Democrats want.
Yeah.
And so he needs something to distinguish himself tonight. It'll be interesting to watch that.
Well, what they're going to be doing,
agree.
I think, to distinguish themselves is they're going to be seeing who can run the furthest left on issues of the day, whether it be, and I guess issues of the day in the Democratic primary. So, I mean, you could say reparations. Cory Booker, I'm sure, is going to be asked about this tonight. And then it's going to be up to the rest of the field to see what they want to do about it. Julian Castro has been sort of the most transparent about his immigration policies and offering a path to citizenship to try to end the immigration stalemate. And Elizabeth Warren has one of the leading proposals out there on student loan debt forgiveness. And I think that's perhaps what we should talk about now is the race to the left on the issue of student debt. We have a difference between Elizabeth Warren, who sort of looks at student loan debt forgiveness with an income cap and really targets debt cancellation for people under a certain family income level. Bernie Sanders, he came out with his own proposal, going all the way with student loan debt cancellation for all. Now, this is probably going to be what everyone starts debating about tonight. Is anybody going to walk away from this and say that it's not a good idea?
I don't think anyone would dare criticize it as straight up not a good idea. I think if any criticism is going to be towards Bernie's plan, because the criticism of that is saying it would only benefit the wealthier people, because I think it's something like the top 25% of households hold more debt than lower income people. So, the people who are saying Bernie's plan wouldn't actually help are just arguing it would benefit the wealthy. So I think that's what the debate is going to center around, rather than just, no, this probably isn't a good idea.
Going back to your point, Stephen, about how all the Democratic candidates seem to just be coming out more towards the left over time. Warren's plan, I think, was the second after Castro's, and it's certainly more moderate than Bernie's. But I think someone in the debate tonight that has shown a bit of a moderate streak while campaigning, despite having almost no national name recognition, John Delaney came out recently criticizing Medicare for All, which has been one of those policy proposals like student debt forgiveness that most of the show-running candidates have been coming further and further to the left. So it might be interesting to watch John Delaney tonight and over the next couple of weeks have a moderating voice and keeping all of the candidates closer to the center.
Is he the one who got booed for poo-pooing socialism recently at a fundraiser?
It might have been. There was also some Howard Schultz similar to that.
Wasn't Howard Schultz? My goodness, yeah. It's kind of amazing to see someone like Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, really not have any traction or interest in this sort of field of candidates. He's such a big name in theory, but I don't think he's going anywhere.
I think a lot of the reaction against Bill de Blasio, he doesn't have a very good national brand image. I think even amongst a lot of liberals, he's seen as a bit of a hypocrite on issues that are becoming more important to them. I think of criminal justice reform. A lot of grassroots issues and individual cases that lead to criminal justice reform come from New York City because their police department and prosecutors' offices have a bit of a bad reputation. And as a mayor, he really hasn't done much to stem that or to encourage criminal justice reform. So there's not much of an appetite for him among a lot of younger, more left-leaning Democrats.
That's true. I don't see him picking up any steam. I'm curious why he's running for president. It's particularly when he's struggled so much in New York City. Maybe he views it as sort of his next act or his only next option. But I want to back us up a little bit to the student debt question. You guys are both college students right now, young voters. What do you sort of see on campus and in your friend circles and in your communities when it comes to the question of student loan forgiveness? Do you think that there's a real appetite for that with young people?
I think I can see it in when you look at young people who chose kind of a school that maybe was a little bit out of their price range. I think what's left out of the conversation a lot is people I know that chose community college for 2 years or for even 4 years as a more affordable option kind of see it as a slap in the face because, they were sitting there, they could have taken out $100,000 in loans too, but some of these kids gave up their dream schools to save money. So now with this question of debt forgiveness, it seems a little bit unfair.
Matthew?
I agree with that. I think I don't want to kind of throw into the pile of the point a lot of conservatives make of they're just college students, they want free stuff, any opportunity to vote for something that benefits them, they'll jump at it. I think for a lot of people that might be true, but there is generally just this culture of taking out loans and trying to go to colleges you can't afford just because everyone else is doing it. I have a close friend personally that seems to jump at any chance to take out a loan to cover college that I think we all know he truly can't afford it. And it's not necessarily his fault that he can't afford it. Not everyone comes from a background where they can go to a 4-year university, but there are people that tend to have a propensity to be a little more reckless with loans just because it's so widespread.
Yeah, there's such a culture in the United States of you got to finish high school and then begin your tenure at a 4-year college, and it's going to be fun. You're going to go for 4 years and you're going to join clubs and you're going to go to parties and you're going to do this and that. And there's not really sort of this, I don't know, moderate sort of temperate view of college is like it's an investment, it's a transaction, and you really need to get in and out of there as quickly as possible because it's very expensive. Jordan, what is your unvarnished opinion of student debt forgiveness? Is there merit to the idea, or do you view it as patently absurd?
I think it's absurd, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced than a lot of people are willing to admit.
How so?
Because a lot of criticism that conservatives and myself have received for being against student debt forgiveness is, well, college isn't affordable anyway. And I agree with that. I think there's ways that we can make college more affordable. I actually wrote an article about that, talking about how government subsidies have made college just completely through the roof in terms of cost. And we can be for both of those things. We can understand that debt forgiveness won't solve the problem. It's kind of a Band-Aid over a systematic issue that needs addressing. So I don't think it's going to do anything. I think it's unfair. And I think a lot of it comes from an entitlement mentality. It's a cultural, like you said before, expectation to attend a fancy 4-year college and then have your debt paid off. And that's not how the real world works.
Matt, she mentioned, the issue of subsidies inflating the cost of college. We've heard this from conservatives and Republican candidates for a long time now. I mean, just like multiple elections, we hear this on debate stages when they talk about how to make college affordable again. But it really just sort of is a non-starter, when it's because it has gone along such partisan lines about the role of government in making it affordable. Is there another way? Is there a third path to try to curb college affordability that maybe doesn't involve sort of polarizing rhetoric about government subsidies?
To be honest, I'm not so sure about that. I think there is a lot of talk and conservative criticism of this proposal that doesn't go much into the weeds about alternate solutions, like you mentioned. I think there just needs to be a culture change. And even if that's not a very thorough or specific answer, we need a business culture that is going to be willing to put aside a lot of the more arbitrary degree requirements. I think especially for entry-level jobs. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go to trade school or anything like that. You see a lot of responses to these proposals saying, we're just talking about college affordability in general. You can go to trade school, or you can go learn a practical skill, do an apprenticeship. You don't have to do that necessarily, but I think just government subsidizing college education for so long. You mentioned there might be another alternate solution to that. I think honestly, it's just led to the inflation of the value of a degree overall. And I'd really like to see a lot of bigger companies start to build this culture of providing training programs for people for entry-level positions that maybe don't need a degree. I think a lot of degrees that people take out a lot of debt to get and then go into an entry-level office job or corporate job, those skills that they learn in school don't really translate. But it's a requirement. You have to have a degree to do those kinds of jobs. So I'd like to see companies take the lead on this.
Jordan, I want to give you the final word before we move on.
Yeah, I would actually totally agree with that. I don't think that if we just completely ended government subsidies today, it would totally fix the problem. A lot of college degrees are a requirement for many jobs, and it's the fact that degrees are a requirement for jobs that maybe don't use the skills you would learn in that degree, but you can't get it without one. That also perpetuates this huge debt crisis, this huge tuition crisis that we're seeing right now.
Absolutely. Thank you both for chiming in on that and sort of sharing some of your perspective. The last issue I wanted to bring to the table here is a ban that is being implemented soon in the city of San Francisco on the sale of e-cigarettes. This is pretty stunning stuff for a city like San Francisco, which, I mean, I guess you think of as progressive, right? And that they obviously would have a lot of clubs and sort of cultural, spots of town. And that obviously goes with smoking culture as well. The city council has moved to ban the sale of vaping products in stores across the city. It will be criminally punishable, and you can be fined for selling these products, not for consuming them. So I guess if you get them out of state and you are vaping on a street, you're still fine in the city of San Francisco, but you're going to have to buy cigarettes if you want to actually smoke. How on earth does this happen in a city like San Francisco? And what's gonna happen to smokers in that city? Because this just sort of seems like pushing people back into the arms of cigarettes in a city that apparently wants to keep people healthy.
This is a textbook example of how cities and localities in America get away with a much bigger regulatory environment than you would expect from your state or even federal government. I think if this proposal was pushed in Congress, which at this point doesn't seem that far-fetched, people would have a much worse reaction. And I think it's true in almost any issue, not even e-cigs or vaping. You saw how when ride-sharing technology first came out in these big cities, a lot of them, like where I'm from, Austin, pushed back and kind of used the power of ordinances and the city government to regulate them out of existence. And it's what San Francisco is doing now. You wouldn't really think that your state government or even Congress would get away with things like this, but they happen in cities all the time. I think people have more of a tolerance for their local cities and counties being kind of ban happy.
I think the regulation is just a textbook example of something that lawmakers don't like, so let's ban it without even thinking about the consequences. Because the goal here is they don't want young people getting addicted to nicotine. But e-cigarettes have been sold in San Francisco for so long now that people who have been using them are already addicted to nicotine. Now that they can't buy it, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to switch to cigarettes, which are, I think, 95% more harmful than e-cigarettes. So they're actually creating this whole extra problem that doesn't address the issue at hand.
That's a great point. And I read an article on it today where a city official from San Francisco was quoted saying, "We don't know everything about the health effects of e-cigs yet." And that was a factor into deciding to ban it. So like you said, Jordan, I think regulators in cities have shown this tendency to ban things that they just kind of are afraid of what it'll happen when people decide voluntarily to do them, and are kind of afraid what will happen if there's not enough regulations in place or the city government isn't in charge of all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that their solution to not knowing all of the health risks to it was an outright ban. But I think there's a middle ground here. They could have advocated for maybe more studies into the health effects, or trying to figure out more about what those effects are, rather than just let's ban them because we don't know everything and we're afraid of it.
And Stephen, you mentioned in your build up to this question, people in San Francisco are going to have to start smoking cigarettes and buying cigarettes if they want to smoke. And that's the biggest issue here, I think, as well. E-cigs are an alternative to people that are getting off smoking cigarettes. And there is something to be said about young people or high schoolers getting into smoking, because e-cigs is that first step for them. But I think the pros of people waning off of tobacco products to do e-cigs just kind of outweigh the risks with young children.
Yeah, that has been what has been shown by studies. And granted, this is a contentious subject, and the FDA has their own suspicions about vaping, and a lot of other studies have shown that it is as much as 95% less harmful than traditional cigarettes. But it's really just, like you guys said, an overreaction that I think is going to push people back into the arms of more harmful products for their health, and that's their choice and prerogative. But this is the way the market works. When you blackball one given product, you're going to move people who wanted that same sort of feeling, that same sort of product, into the field of something else. This is just how it works. So, if this is what San Francisco wants to do, I believe in localities. I believe in sort of local governance and people being able to have the culture that they want. So if this is what San Francisco wants, have at it. National researchers will have a great case study to look at for where smoking rates of traditional cigarettes increased in a country where smoking is rapidly declining because it has fallen out of favor. I think San Francisco will provide the case study for how to actually make smoking rates go back up. And that is unfortunate. All right, that brings us to the end of our time for these segments. I want to transition over to News of the Week, underreported stuff. What has got you interested? I want folks to get a chance to know a little bit more about Jordan Lancaster and Matt Liles. So what are you interested in and consuming this week? Jordan, what's been on your mind?
I've just really been thinking, we kind of already talked about this, but the Democrat kind of rat race to the left. Something that I haven't really seen expressed is, Bernie Sanders stand out in 2016 and even Trump stand out in 2016 was because they were kind of the only radicals. So now, where are we going to go in a field of 20 people trying to be the most radical? That's just what I've been thinking about this week.
Yeah, we ended up with Trump rising to the surface because he was willing to be the loudest. I would not be surprised if we repeated that with the Democratic field this year.
Right.
Matthew Liles, what's been on your mind?
Yes, you mentioned I had an op-ed published in Town Hall today. The Supreme Court on Monday came out with a decision in the case Yonku versus Brunetti. And it's a trademark case, and so it's not a very sexy case or one that grabs a lot of headlines. But I thought it was really important for First Amendment implications. It struck down, the court struck down a little clause in the act that regulates how the U.S. Patent Office can accept or deny trademark applications. And in this case, they struck down a man's clothing brand that he tried to get registered with the name SUCT, and which you can imagine saying that differently would sound a little bit vulgar. But they decided that in a case very similar to this one 2 years ago, it was the same decision, decided that the Patent and Trademark Office shouldn't have the authority to decide what constitutes vulgar or scandalous speech to people. And I think that's really great. That act was allowing the federal government to basically engage in viewpoint discrimination. And that's where Justice Kagan wrote the majority opinion. She really nailed hard on that. It's not okay, even in a minor regulatory issue like registering trademarks, for the federal government to have the power to enforce things like that or choose what is acceptable speech and what isn't. So I think that case has been underreported on a little bit, but it was an important victory for free speech.
My thing that I would like to add that I saw breaking earlier this morning is that the NRA has parted ways with Dana Losich, and they have discontinued NRA TV. I think both of these things are good for gun rights advocacy and for the NRA in general. The organization does play an important role in protecting the rights of gun owners across the country, but they have become too politicized and they have become too toxic to effectively do that mission. NRA TV is also just a bad product and has really just gotten into some seedy activity and kinds of content. So the only chance for the NRA to continue being the useful organization that they once were is to get rid of both of these pieces of baggage from their roster. So good for them. That brings us to the end of Underscored for June 26th. I am Stephen Kent. I've been your host, and we've been joined by Jordan Lancaster and Matthew Liles. I'll be putting both of their Twitter handles in the show notes so you can follow them online and get familiar with more of their work. You can follow Young Voices on Twitter at YVADV and myself at Stephen_Kent89. I look forward to hearing from you, and we'll be back next week with more and surely some reactions on what we're going to see in the Democratic debates today and tomorrow. Until then, stay free.